This is what dirty gets you.
The septic tank exploded at 3:17 a.m., spraying liquid waste across the Hendersons' manicured lawn like a geyser unleashed from the underworld. Noel Merritt stood in the darkness, watching the chaos unfold through his truck's windshield, his face carved from stone. The emergency call had been a setup. He'd triggered the blockage himself 3 days ago. Now, as panicked homeowners stumbled from their houses in bathrobes, he wasn't thinking about the cleanup. He was thinking about Dana's phone, buzzing with messages she thought he couldn't see. The tracker app showed her car parked at Clearwater Lake. Again. Third time this week. Noel shifted the truck into drive and rolled past the disaster zone without stopping. His crew would handle the mess in the morning. Tonight, he had more pressing business. The gravel crunched under his tires as he parked behind a cluster of oak trees overlooking the lake access road. Dana's silver Accord sat in the shadows 50 yards away, windows fogged. Next to it, a black Escalade with dealer plates. Colby Duvall's ride. Noel pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. The zoom lens caught everything. Dana's blonde hair pressed against the passenger window, Colby's hands tangled in her blouse, their bodies moving in a rhythm that had nothing to do with marital vows. He took 17 photos, each one sharper than the last. When they finally separated, Noel watched his wife of 12 years smooth her hair and check her makeup in the rearview mirror. Professional. Practiced. Like she'd done this 100 times before. The Escalade pulled away first, taillights disappearing toward the wealthy side of town. Dana followed 5 minutes later, probably heading home to wash off the evidence and slip into bed beside him. Noel sat in the darkness for another hour, scrolling through the photos. In the harsh LED glow, his face could have been chiseled from granite. No tears, no rage, just calculation. By the time he drove home, Dana was already in their bedroom, pretending to sleep. Her breathing was too controlled, too rhythmic. Guilty people always tried too hard to appear innocent. Noel grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the hall closet and made his way to the guest room. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning, Dana found him in the kitchen, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee like nothing had changed. She moved around him with practiced efficiency, grabbing her travel mug and checking her phone. "How was the emergency call?" she asked, not looking up from her screen. "Messy." Noel turned the page. "The Hendersons are going to need a complete system replacement." "That's expensive." "Very." She kissed the top of his head, a gesture so automatic it made his stomach turn. "I've got showings all day." "Don't wait up if I'm late." "I won't." After she left, Noel opened his laptop and began making calls. The first was to Jim Bailey, a lawyer who owed him favors from a septic emergency at his lake house. The second was to his accountant. The third was to a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial work. By noon, he had a plan. The business assets were the first priority. Merritt Sanitation and Construction had been built from nothing over 15 years, growing from a single truck to a fleet of 20 vehicles and 43 employees. Dana's name was on some of the papers, a decision he now regretted, but Jim assured him there were ways to protect the core assets. "You're talking about divorce?" Jim asked over the phone. "I'm talking about preparation," Noel replied. "The business stays intact no matter what happens." "That's smart thinking. Most guys wait until it's too late." Noel hung up and walked to his office window. Below, his crew was loading equipment for the Henderson job. Rick Boone, his foreman, was directing traffic with the calm authority of someone who'd been doing this work for 20 years. Rick was one of the few people Noel trusted completely, a rare commodity in his current situation. The PI, a thin woman named Sarah Cross, arrived at 2 p.m. with a briefcase full of surveillance equipment. She had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many marriages fall apart. "How long do you think this has been going on?" she asked, reviewing the lake photos on Noel's phone. "Hard to say. I noticed changes about 3 months ago. New clothes, different perfume, working late more often. Classic signs." "The location tracking is smart. Most people don't think about their phones giving them away." Sarah made notes in a leather portfolio. "I'll need a few days to establish patterns. We want documentation that will hold up in court." "What about the man?" "Colby Duvall. I know him by reputation. Owns 3 car dealerships. Thinks he's untouchable because he has money. Lives in Meadowbrook with his wife and 2 kids. Sarah smiled grimly. Rich men always believe they're smarter than they are. After Sarah left, Noel spent the afternoon in his workshop, modifying equipment. He removed the safety valve from one of his smaller pump trucks and installed a manual override system. The work was precise, methodical. If someone didn't know what they were looking at, it would appear completely normal. Dana came home at 11 p.m., smelling like expensive cologne and making excuses about difficult clients. Noel pretended to believe her, nodding at appropriate moments while she talked about property values and mortgage rates. "I'm sleeping in the guest room," he said when she finished her performance. "Why? Are you feeling sick?" "Just need better sleep. The emergency calls have been wearing me down." She accepted the explanation without question. Another red flag. A faithful wife would have been concerned, maybe offered to make him tea, or suggested he see a doctor. Dana just shrugged and headed for the shower. 3 days later, Sarah called with an update. "They're meeting at the Riverside Inn on Thursday afternoons. He books the same room every week, 317. I've got photos of them entering together, leaving separately. The affair is well established. Any indication they're planning something beyond just sleeping together?" "That's where it gets interesting. I followed your wife to a lawyer's office yesterday. Gerald Hoffman specializes in high-asset divorces. She was there for 2 hours. Noel felt something cold settle in his chest. She's planning to file. Looks that way. And there's something else. Duval's been to the same lawyer. Different day, but same office. They're coordinating. I'd bet money on it. These people think they're playing chess, but they're really just painting targets on their backs." That evening, Noel confronted Dana with surgical precision. Not about the affair, not yet, but about their finances. "I'm thinking about expanding the business," he said over dinner. "Maybe buy out Peterson's equipment when he retires." "That sounds expensive." "It would be. I need to leverage some of our personal assets. The house, maybe some of the investment accounts." Dana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I don't know if that's smart right now. The market's been volatile." "You're probably right. It's just that opportunities like this don't come around often." Noel kept his voice casual, but he was watching her face carefully. "I'll probably need to move some money around anyway. Reorganize the business structure for tax purposes. Maybe we should talk to a financial advisor first." "Good idea." The conversation seemed innocent enough, but Noel had learned what he needed to know. Dana's hesitation, her sudden concern about market volatility, the suggestion to involve a third party, she was stalling because she knew her lawyer would need time to establish her claim on the assets. Two could play that game. The next morning, Noel met with his accountant and began the process of restructuring Merit Sanitation. The company would become a limited liability corporation with multiple subsidiaries, each owning different assets. Dana's name would be quietly removed from all but the most basic paperwork, and any community property claims would be limited to the least valuable components. "This is pretty aggressive," his accountant warned. "If she's got a good lawyer, they might challenge it." "Let them try," Noel replied. "Everything we're doing is legal." The business was established before the marriage, and the growth came from reinvested profits, not marital assets. What about the house? The house is expendable. That afternoon, Noel drove to Meadowbrook, the upscale development where Colby, Duval lived. The houses were large and identical, with perfectly manicured lawns and circular driveways that screamed new money. Colby's place was easy to spot. The black Escalade sat in front of a colonial with more columns than a government building. Noel parked across the street and waited. An hour later, a woman emerged from the house. She was blonde like Dana, but older, with the kind of understated elegance that came from actual breeding rather than just money. This had to be Lacey Duval. She climbed into a white Mercedes and drove toward town. Noel followed at a distance, watching as she stopped at the grocery store, the dry cleaner, and finally, the Clinton Ridge Community Center. He waited until she went inside, then approached the building. The community center was hosting a charity auction for the local food bank. Noel bought a ticket and mingled with the crowd, keeping one eye on Lacey Duval. She was working the room like a professional, making small talk and checking silent auction items. Everything about her suggested control and sophistication. When she stepped outside for air, Noel followed. "Mrs. Duval?" She turned, eyebrows raised. "Yes? I'm Noel Merritt. I think we need to talk." For a moment, her composure slipped. Just a flicker, but enough to confirm she knew exactly who he was. I don't think we have anything to discuss, she said carefully. Your husband is sleeping with my wife. I'd say that gives us plenty to discuss. Lacey glanced around the parking lot, making sure they weren't being overheard. What do you want? Information, cooperation, maybe a little justice? I'm not interested in playing games. Neither am I. Noel pulled out his phone and showed her one of the lake photos. This was taken 4 days ago. I have dozens more, plus hotel records, phone logs, and credit card statements. Your husband isn't as careful as he thinks he is. Lacey studied the image with the detached interest of someone examining evidence. How long have you known? Long enough to be sure. How long have you known? 6 months, maybe longer. Her voice was steady, but there was ice beneath the surface. I hired a detective when I found hotel charges on his credit card. Men like Colby think they're untouchable because they have money, but money leaves a trail. Are you planning to divorce him? I'm planning to destroy him. The words came out calm and measured, like she was discussing the weather. Colby thinks I'm just a pretty face who spends his money, but I have an MBA from Wharton and I know where every penny of his assets are hidden. When I'm done, he'll be lucky to qualify for food stamps. Noel felt the first genuine smile he'd experienced in weeks. I think we're going to get along just fine. They talked for another 20 minutes, sharing information and establishing ground rules. Lacey had financial records that would prove Colby was hiding assets from the IRS. Noel had surveillance footage that would establish a pattern of adultery. Together, they could coordinate their attacks for maximum damage. One rule, Lacey said as they prepared to part ways. I don't want either of them physically harmed. Ruined, yes. Hospitalized, no. Agreed. This is about justice, not violence. She handed him a business card with her personal number written on the back. Call me when you're ready to move. Dana's routine was predictable. Thursday afternoons at the Riverside Inn, Saturday evening client meetings that lasted until midnight, and at least 2 other weekday encounters at various locations around town. She was getting careless, probably because she thought Noel was too stupid or too trusting to catch on. That was about to change. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Noel positioned himself across from the Riverside Inn with a clear view of the parking lot. At 2:15 p.m., Dana's Accord pulled into the far corner, followed minutes later by Colby's Escalade. They entered the building separately, maintaining the illusion of discretion. At 2:45 p.m., Noel made his move. He walked into the lobby wearing work clothes and carrying a clipboard. The desk clerk looked up with the expression of someone who dealt with contractors on a regular basis. I'm here about the septic inspection, Noel announced. Building department sent me to check the overflow systems. I wasn't told about any inspection. Emergency order. We had a major backup at the Henderson place last week, and the county wants all commercial properties checked. Noel showed him an official-looking form that was complete fiction. I just need to examine the plumbing in a few rooms. Won't take more than 20 minutes. The clerk was young and clearly didn't want to deal with bureaucratic complications. I guess that's okay. Do you need keys? Just need to know which rooms are occupied so I don't disturb the guests. We're pretty empty today. Just rooms 317, 228, and 104. Perfect. I'll start with the upper floors and work my way down. Noel took the stairs to the 3rd floor and walked quietly down the hallway. Room 317 was at the end, and even through the door he could hear voices. He pulled out his phone and began recording, positioning himself near the keycard lock where the sound would be clearest. Just need to be patient a little longer, Dana was saying. Once the refinancing goes through, I'll have access to the equity. How much are we talking about? Colby's voice was muffled but audible. The house is worth about $400,000. With his business income, I should be able to get a loan for $350, maybe more. What about the prenup? There is no prenup. He was too trusting when we got married, and I was smart enough not to suggest it. Colby laughed. Poor bastard has no idea what's coming. The lawyer thinks I can get half of everything, plus alimony. The business alone is worth over $2 million. When do you file? Soon. I want to make sure all the financial arrangements are in place first. Once I have the loan, his credit will be tied to mine. Even if he tries to hide assets, the bank will come after him for the money. Noel had heard enough. He backed away from the door and made his way to the stairwell, his mind racing with the implications. Dana wasn't just cheating. She was planning to steal everything he'd worked for and leave him financially ruined in the process. The recording was 17 minutes long and absolutely devastating. Between the adultery and the financial conspiracy, Dana had just handed him enough ammunition to bury her in court. But court would take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, she'd have access to his accounts, his credit, and his reputation. By the time the legal system finished with them, there might not be anything left to fight over. No, this required a more direct approach. The plan came together over the next 2 weeks. Lacey provided financial records showing that Colby had been skimming money from his dealerships to fund his affair, including hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and jewelry that never made it home to his wife. Noel contributed surveillance footage, phone records, and the devastating hotel recording. But the real weapon was the business itself. Merit Sanitation had contracts with half the commercial properties in Clinton Ridge, including all 3 of Colby's car dealerships. Those contracts included clauses about environmental compliance, waste disposal, and emergency response. More importantly, they gave Noel's company access to the property's septic and drainage systems. "You're gonna do what?" Rick asked when Noel explained the plan. "Colby Duvall needs to understand that actions have consequences," Noel replied. "This is just education." They started with the smallest dealership, a used car lot on the outskirts of town. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, Noel and Rick used their master key to access the property's waste management system. The lot's septic tank was connected to the main building through a series of underground pipes that ran beneath the customer parking area. Noel had modified one of his smaller pump trucks with a reverse flow capability. Instead of removing waste, it could pump liquid back into the system under high pressure. He'd tested the modification on an abandoned property. It worked perfectly. The setup took 45 minutes. Rick positioned the truck while Noel opened the septic access and connected the hoses. Then they pumped 300 gallons of raw sewage back into the system, creating pressure that would force the waste up through every drain in the building. By morning, the dealership looked like a disaster zone. Sewage had erupted from toilets, sinks, and floor drains, flooding the showroom and office areas. The smell was indescribable. Colby arrived at 9 a.m. to find his employees standing in the parking lot, too disgusted to enter the building. The fire department had already been called, along with the health department and an emergency cleanup crew. Noel watched from across the street, sipping coffee and enjoying the show. Colby was screaming at his manager, gesturing wildly at the mess. The cleanup would cost thousands of dollars, and the lot would be closed for at least a week. But this was just the beginning. 3 days later, the second dealership experienced a catastrophic system failure that flooded the service bay with wastewater. The timing was perfect. A dozen customers were waiting for their cars when the eruption began. Videos of people running from the building while holding their noses went viral on social media within hours. The third incident happened during Colby's biggest sales event of the year. His flagship dealership was hosting a tent sale with live music, food trucks, and promotional giveaways. 200 potential customers were browsing the lot when every drain in the building backed up simultaneously. The chaos was biblical. Sewage fountained from storm drains, creating rivers of waste that flowed across the parking lot and into the street. Cars were contaminated, customers fled in panic, and the local news crew that had been covering the sale got footage that would lead the evening broadcast. Colby's reputation was destroyed overnight. Social media exploded with jokes about Duvall's crash show sales and crappy car deals. The health department shut down all 3 locations pending a full investigation. His insurance company began asking uncomfortable questions about the statistical impossibility of 3 separate system failures in less than 2 weeks. But the real damage was financial. Between cleanup costs, lost sales, and contaminated inventory, Colby was hemorrhaging money. His dealership franchise was threatening to revoke his license. His bank was reviewing his loan agreements. And through it all, Noel maintained perfect deniability. Merit Sanitation had responded to all 3 emergencies with professional efficiency, working around the clock to contain the damage. No one suspected that the same company causing the problems was also profiting from the solutions. Dana was starting to crack under the pressure. Colby's financial troubles were affecting her own plans, and she'd begun making mistakes. She forgot to delete text messages, left her laptop open to emails from her lawyer, and started drinking more wine with dinner. "Everything okay at work?" Noel asked one evening, watching her pace around the kitchen. "Fine. Just some difficult clients. Anyone I know. She shot him a sharp look. Why would you know my clients? Small town. Word gets around. Noel turned back to his newspaper. I heard Colby Duvall's been having some troubles with his dealerships. Sewage problems, from what I understand. Dana's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. I wouldn't know anything about that. Terrible thing, really. 3 separate system failures in 2 weeks. Has to be some kind of record. These things happen. Not usually. Most commercial septic systems are designed to last decades without major problems. Noel looked up from his paper. Of course, if someone wanted to cause problems, it wouldn't be that difficult. All you'd need is access to the system and the right equipment. What are you suggesting? Nothing. Just making conversation. He smiled. Although I did notice that all 3 of Duvall's properties use our waste management services. Interesting coincidence. Dana set down her wine glass with trembling fingers. I'm going to bed. Sweet dreams. After she left, Noel opened his laptop and reviewed the surveillance footage from the past week. Dana had been to see her lawyer twice, made 17 phone calls to Colby, and spent 3 hours researching bankruptcy law on her computer. The pressure was working. The next phase of the plan required more delicate timing. Lacey had been systematically documenting Colby's hidden assets, including a secret account in the Cayman Islands and a partnership in a luxury car import business that he'd never reported to the IRS. She'd also discovered that he'd been falsifying loan applications by inflating his income and understating his debts. The federal charges alone could put him away for 10 years, she told Noel during one of their clandestine meetings. But I want him to lose everything first. Prison will be more educational if he's already broke. What about Dana? What about her? She's planning to file for divorce as soon as she secures a loan against our house. Once that money is in her account, she'll disappear. Lacey considered this. Can you prevent the loan? I've already started. My accountant is restructuring the business assets, and my lawyer is challenging her claim to the house. But there's a window of vulnerability while the paperwork is processed. How long? Maybe 2 weeks. After that, her lawyer won't be able to touch anything that matters. Then we move faster. The accelerated timeline meant taking bigger risks. Instead of waiting for natural opportunities, they'd have to create their own. Lacey used her social connections to organize a charity fundraiser at the Clinton Ridge Country Club, ostensibly to raise money for local flood victims. The event would bring together everyone who mattered in the community, including Dana and Colby, who wouldn't be able to avoid attending without looking suspicious. The fundraiser was scheduled for Saturday evening, giving them 5 days to prepare. Noel spent those days making modifications to his equipment and coordinating with Rick, who had volunteered to help with the more technical aspects of the operation. You sure about this? Rick asked as they tested the pump system behind Noel's workshop. This is going to be pretty public. That's the point. Dana and Colby have been conducting their affair in secret, hiding behind lies and deception. Time to drag everything into the light. And if we get caught, we won't. The equipment is legitimate. The chemicals are standard waste treatment products, and everything we're doing is technically legal. Messy but legal. The modifications took 3 days to complete. Noel removed the standard dispersal system from his largest pump truck and installed a high-pressure sprayer normally used for cleaning septic tanks. He also added a remote trigger system that would allow him to activate the spray from up to 50 yards away. The payload was a mixture of processed sewage and industrial-strength stench enhancer, a chemical compound used to identify gas leaks. The combination would create an odor so powerful it could clear a building in minutes, while the liquid component would stain everything it touched with a color and smell that would last for weeks. On Saturday afternoon, Noel positioned the truck in the country club's service area, hidden behind a maintenance building where it would blend in with other utility vehicles. The sprayer was aimed at the club's main entrance and dining patio, where cocktail hour would be held before the formal dinner. At 6 p.m., the first guests began arriving. Dana came alone, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She mingled with the crowd, playing the role of concerned community member while checking her phone every few minutes. Colby arrived 20 minutes later with Lacey, both of them maintaining the facade of a happily married couple. He was tan and confident, working the room like he owned it. Several people approached him with condolences about his recent business troubles, but he brushed off their concern with jokes about the hazards of the septic business. Noel watched from the bar, nursing a beer and waiting for the right moment. The plan required both Dana and Colby to be visible when the chaos began, preferably near the center of the crowd where they couldn't escape without being seen. At 6:45 p.m., the opportunity presented itself. Dana was standing near the patio railing, talking to a group of women about property values. Colby was 15 feet away, holding court with some local business owners. Both of them were perfectly positioned in the target zone. Noel pulled out his phone and opened the remote control app. His finger hovered over the trigger button for a moment, then pressed down. The explosion of sewage was magnificent. The high-pressure system launched a geyser of brown liquid 30 feet in the air, creating a fountain of waste that rained down on the patio like a biblical plague. The smell hit a moment later, a concentrated wave of stench that sent people stumbling away from the blast zone, gagging and covering their faces. Dana was directly in the path of the initial spray. The black dress became a canvas of human waste, and her blonde hair was plastered to her skull with liquid that defied description. She tried to run, but slipped on the wet stone, falling face first into a puddle of sewage. Colby fared no better. His white shirt and tan slacks were soaked through, and the smell seemed to follow him as he stumbled toward the parking lot. Several people recorded his retreat on their phones, capturing the moment when Clinton Ridge's most arrogant businessman became a walking disaster. The chaos lasted for 8 glorious minutes before Noel shut off the system. By then, half the party had fled the scene, and the other half was standing in the parking lot, too shocked to speak. The patio looked like a war zone, covered in waste and abandoned personal items. Dana sat in the middle of it all, covered in sewage and crying. Her phone had been destroyed in the fall, her purse was floating in a puddle of waste, and her carefully constructed image lay in ruins around her. Noel finished his beer and walked calmly to his truck. As he drove away, he could hear sirens in the distance. The fire department would have to hose down the area, the health department would investigate, and the country club would need professional cleaning services, all of which would be provided by Merit Sanitation at premium emergency rates. The fallout from the country club incident was immediate and devastating. Videos of the sewage explosion went viral within hours, with Dana's fall becoming a particularly popular meme. Local news stations picked up the story, and cable networks ran it as a human interest piece about the hazards of aging infrastructure. But the social media attention was nothing compared to the professional consequences. Dana's real estate clients began canceling appointments, unwilling to be associated with someone who'd become a public laughingstock. Her office received dozens of prank calls, and her boss started questioning whether she was a liability to the company's reputation. Colby's situation was even worse. His insurance company refused to cover the contaminated inventory from his dealerships, citing suspicious circumstances. His franchise agreement was terminated, and his business loans were called in early. The IRS launched an investigation into his tax returns, prompted by an anonymous tip that included detailed financial records. Within a week, both of them were facing financial ruin. Dana tried to salvage the situation by accelerating her divorce plans, but the loan application she'd submitted was rejected when the bank discovered that Noel had already filed paperwork challenging her claim to the house. Her lawyer informed her that the community property laws she'd been counting on wouldn't apply to business assets that predated the marriage. "What do you mean I can't touch the company?" she screamed during a phone conversation that Noel overheard from the next room. "The business was established before your marriage, and your name was only added to secondary documents," the lawyer explained. "Without proof that marital assets were used to grow the company, you have no claim to the primary holdings. But I was listed as a partner. You were listed as a beneficiary for insurance purposes. That's very different from being a legal partner." Dana threw her phone across the room hard enough to crack the screen. When she looked up, Noel was standing in the doorway. "Having a bad day?" he asked. "You bastard. You planned this whole thing. I don't know what you're talking about. The sewage, the business restructuring, all of it. You've been setting me up." Noel walked into the room and sat down across from her. "Dana, I want you to listen very carefully. For 12 years, I trusted you. I worked 18-hour days to build something that would provide for both of us. I put your name on documents, shared my dreams with you, and believed that we were partners in every sense of the word. We were partners. No, we weren't. Partners don't lie to each other. Partners don't steal from each other. And partners sure as heck don't plot to destroy each other with their lovers' help." Dana's face went pale. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." Noel pulled out his phone and played 30 seconds of the hotel recording. Her voice filled the room, discussing loan amounts and asset division with casual cruelty. You recorded us? I documented everything. The affair, the financial conspiracy, the lies you told our friends and family. I have enough evidence to destroy you in court, but I'm not going to wait for court. What do you want? I want you out of my house. I want you out of my life. And I want you to understand that actions have consequences. Dana stood up, her hands shaking with rage. You can't just throw me out. I have rights. Read the paperwork your lawyer filed. You'll find that your rights are more limited than you thought. Noel's voice was calm, almost conversational. The house is in my name, purchased before our marriage with money I earned. The business assets are protected by corporate structure. Your claim to community property extends to about $12,000 in a joint checking account and half the furniture. This is illegal. You can't hide assets from a divorce. I'm not hiding anything. I'm protecting what was always mine. Noel stood up and walked toward the door. You have until tomorrow morning to pack your personal belongings. After that, I'm changing the locks. And if I refuse, then you'll be trespassing on private property, and I'll have you arrested. Dana stared at him for a long moment, probably looking for some sign of the man she'd married. But that man was gone, replaced by someone harder and infinitely more dangerous. You're going to regret this, she said finally. No, Noel replied. I'm not. Dana left the next morning with 2 suitcases and the Honda Accord. She tried to take more, but Noel had prepared an itemized list of everything in the house, separating marital property from personal assets. The furniture, electronics, and artwork all belonged to him, purchased with business income that predated their marriage. She moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions. The contrast with her previous lifestyle was stark and intentional. Every morning, she'd wake up to the sound of traffic from the highway and the smell of diesel fuel from the truck stop next door. Colby's situation was deteriorating even faster. The IRS had seized his bank accounts and placed liens on his properties. His wife had filed for divorce and was demanding half of everything he owned, including assets he'd tried to hide overseas. The federal investigation into his tax evasion was moving forward, and prosecutors were discussing criminal charges. But Noel wasn't finished with either of them. The next phase of his plan required patience and precision. He'd learned from Sarah Cross that Dana was meeting with a bankruptcy lawyer, exploring options for debt relief and asset protection. She was also looking for a job, though her reputation made her virtually unemployable in the local real estate market. Colby, meanwhile, was trying to liquidate his remaining assets before his wife's lawyers could claim them. He'd put his house on the market and was negotiating to sell his share of the import business to his overseas partners. Both of them were focused on financial survival, which made them predictable. And predictable people made easy targets. Noel started with Dana's job search. Every time she applied for a position, he made sure the potential employer received an anonymous email with links to the viral videos from the country club incident. The emails were professionally written, expressing concern about hiring someone with recent public relations challenges and suggesting that a simple internet search would reveal the full scope of the problem. The strategy was devastatingly effective. Dana would interview well, sometimes even receiving verbal job offers, only to have them rescinded after the employer conducted a background check. She began to suspect sabotage, but couldn't prove anything. Colby's real estate sale was disrupted through more direct means. Noel had Rick pose as a potential buyer, expressing interest in the Meadowbrook property and requesting a private showing. During the tour, Rick asked detailed questions about the home's septic system, mentioning that he'd heard about problems with similar properties in the area. "Oh, we've never had any issues," Colby assured him. "This system was installed just 5 years ago." "That's good to hear. I work in waste management, so I know how expensive these problems can be to fix." Rick pulled out his phone and showed Colby a photo of one of his dealerships mid-disaster. "This is what happens when systems fail. Takes weeks to clean up, costs thousands of dollars." Colby went pale. That's one of my businesses." "Really? Small world. We handle the cleanup for a lot of commercial properties." "Seems like you've had some bad luck lately." "Yeah, some kind of freak coincidence." 3 separate failures in 2 weeks? That's not coincidence, that's sabotage." Rick's voice was casual, but his eyes were hard. "Someone wanted to hurt your business, and they knew exactly how to do it." Colby's hands started trembling. "What are you saying?" I'm saying you should be very careful about who you trust. And maybe think about what you might have done to make someone that angry. Rick left without making an offer, but the damage was done. Colby spent the rest of the day calling security companies and researching surveillance systems. He was starting to understand that his troubles weren't random bad luck. They were targeted revenge. But understanding didn't help him solve the problem. His house sale fell through when the next potential buyer discovered the property's connection to the dealership disasters. His business partners began distancing themselves, worried about guilt by association. His legal bills were mounting faster than he could pay them. Within 2 weeks, Colby was forced to declare bankruptcy. The final confrontation happened on a Thursday afternoon in October. Dana had been living in the motel for 6 weeks, surviving on unemployment benefits and growing increasingly desperate. Her bankruptcy filing had been rejected because of the suspicious timing relative to her divorce proceedings. Her lawyer had withdrawn from the case, citing unpaid bills and irreconcilable differences about strategy. She'd also discovered that Noel had been systematically sabotaging her job applications. The realization came when a former colleague mentioned seeing her in viral videos, expressing sympathy for her humiliating experience at the country club. The colleague also mentioned receiving an email about Dana's character issues from someone claiming to be a concerned community member. The email had details about your personal life that only a close friend would know, the colleague explained. Whoever sent it really wanted to make sure you didn't get hired. Dana knew immediately who that someone was. She drove to the Merritt sanitation office that afternoon, parking next to Noel's truck and marching into the building like she still belonged there. The receptionist tried to stop her, but Dana pushed past and headed straight for Noel's office. He was sitting behind his desk, reviewing invoices with the calm concentration of someone who'd put his life back together. He looked up when she burst through the door, his expression shifting from surprise to cold amusement. Dana, you look terrible. You destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure there were consequences. She slammed the door behind her and advanced on his desk. You think you're so smart, don't you? Sitting here in your little kingdom playing puppet master while my world falls apart. Your world fell apart because you decided to betray the person who loved you most. Noel's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. Everything that happened to you was a direct result of choices you made. I made one mistake. You made a dozen mistakes. The affair was just the beginning. You conspired to steal my business, forge loan documents, and leave me financially ruined. That wasn't a mistake. That was a crime. Dana laughed bitterly. And what you did to us wasn't criminal? Sabotaging Colby's businesses, destroying my career, humiliating us in public? Everything I did was legal. Unpleasant, maybe, but legal. You can't say the same about fraud, adultery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Legal doesn't mean right. Neither does marriage, apparently. Noel stood up, his full height making the office seem smaller. You want to talk about right and wrong? Let's talk about the 12 years I spent building something meaningful while you planned to destroy it. Let's talk about the trust I placed in you and how you used it as a weapon against me. I loved you. No, you didn't. You loved what I could provide for you. The house, the lifestyle, the social status. When Colby offered you something better, you didn't hesitate to throw away everything we'd built together. Dana's composure finally cracked. You're a vindictive, cruel man. I hope you're happy with what you've become. I'm not happy, Noel admitted, but I'm free. Free from your lies, your manipulation, and your complete lack of loyalty. That's worth more than happiness. And what about Colby? What did he ever do to you besides fall in love with the wrong woman? Colby didn't fall in love with you. He saw an opportunity to take what belonged to another man, and he took it. Men like him believe they're entitled to whatever they want, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. So you decided to play God. I decided to play by the same rules you and Colby established. No mercy, no forgiveness, no second chances. Dana stared at him for a long moment, looking for some trace of the man she'd married. But Noel had changed fundamentally, hardened into something implacable and unforgiving. This isn't over, she said finally. Yes, it is. Your divorce will be finalized next month, and after that, we'll never see each other again. You'll rebuild your life somewhere else, hopefully with a better understanding of consequences. And if I don't want to rebuild? What if I want to fight? With what? You have no money, no job, no friends, and no legal standing. Your reputation is destroyed, your credit is ruined, and your boyfriend is facing federal charges. Noel sat back down and returned to his paperwork. You're welcome to fight, but you'll be fighting alone. Dana stood there for another minute, probably hoping he'd show some sign of weakness or regret. When none came, she turned and walked toward the door. Anna. She stopped but didn't turn around. The next time you decide to betray someone who loves you, Noel said quietly, make sure they don't have access to industrial equipment and a working knowledge of the county's waste management systems. She left without another word. Colby's final humiliation came 3 weeks later, during his federal sentencing hearing. Lacey had provided prosecutors with evidence of 15 separate instances of tax evasion, ranging from unreported income to fraudulent business deductions. The IRS calculated his total liability at just over $3 million, including penalties and interest. But the criminal charges were what really destroyed him. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. His assets would be liquidated to pay his debts, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a criminal record that would follow him for life. Noel attended the sentencing, sitting in the back row of the courtroom where Colby couldn't see him. When the verdict was read, Colby's legs buckled and he had to be helped to a chair by his attorney. The arrogant businessman who'd believed himself untouchable was reduced to a broken man begging for mercy. Lacey also attended, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom with the same cold composure she'd maintained throughout the entire process. When their eyes met across the room, she gave Noel a small nod of satisfaction. After the hearing, they met in the courthouse parking lot. Feel better? She asked. Feel complete, Noel replied. What about you? I feel vindicated. Colby spent 20 years treating me like an accessory, assuming I was too stupid to understand his business or too weak to fight back. Watching him realize how wrong he was, that was worth everything. What's next for you? I'm moving to Seattle. My sister has a consulting firm there, and she's offered me a partnership. New city, new life, new beginning. Sounds like a plan. What about Dana? Dana's leaving town next week. She found a job in Phoenix. Apparently, they're less thorough with background checks in Arizona. Lacey smiled grimly. Think she learned her lesson? I think she learned that actions have consequences. Whether that changes her behavior in the future, that's not my problem anymore. They shook hands like business partners, concluding a successful venture, which in many ways they were. Then Lacey drove away in her white Mercedes, heading toward a future that no longer included her cheating husband. Noel stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, watching the last of the courthouse employees leave for the day. It had taken 4 months to completely destroy the people who betrayed him, but the work was finally complete. Dana was broke and unemployable. Colby was heading to federal prison. The affair that had started with passionate meetings at lakeside hotels had ended with public humiliation and criminal prosecution. Justice, Noel reflected, was a dish best served with industrial equipment and careful planning. 6 months later, Noel was having coffee in his office when Rick knocked on the door. Boss, there's someone here to see you. Who is it? Says her name is Jennifer Walsh, claims she has information about Dana Merritt. Noel looked up from his paperwork. Send her in. Jennifer Walsh was a thin woman in her 50s with nervous eyes and calloused hands. She introduced herself as Dana's former roommate at the motel, explaining that she'd moved out 2 weeks before Dana left for Phoenix. I probably shouldn't be here, she began, but I thought you should know what she was planning. Planning? She talked about you constantly, how you'd ruined her life, how you'd stolen everything she deserved. Toward the end, she was talking about getting even. Noel felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest. Getting even how? She had this idea about coming back in a few years when things had calmed down. Maybe hiring a lawyer from out of state, challenging the divorce settlement. She thought if she could prove you'd hidden assets or something, she might be able to reopen the case. That's not how divorce law works. I told her that, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced that all she needed was the right approach, the right evidence. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her chair. There's something else. She asked me to mail some letters for her after she left town. Said she didn't trust the Phoenix postal system. What kind of letters? I don't know for sure, but one of them was addressed to the IRS. Another one went to the state attorney general's office. She said something about reporting tax fraud and hidden business assets. Noel was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. Dana was trying to weaponize the legal system against him, hoping that federal investigators would find something his lawyers had missed. It was a desperate move, but potentially dangerous if she'd fabricated convincing evidence. "When did you mail these letters?" he asked. "Yesterday. I'm sorry. I should have opened them first, but she paid me $50 and I needed the money." "It's not your fault." Noel pulled out his wallet and handed her $500. "But I appreciate you telling me." After Jennifer left, Noel called his lawyer and accountant, explaining the situation and requesting immediate reviews of all business filings. If Dana had submitted false allegations to federal agencies, he needed to be prepared with documentation that would refute her claims. The preparations took 2 weeks, but they proved unnecessary. Dana's letters to the IRS and Attorney General's office were investigated and dismissed within a month. The agencies found no evidence of hidden assets or fraudulent business practices, and Dana's credibility was undermined by her criminal background check, which revealed the conspiracy charges that had been filed and later dropped as part of her plea agreement. The final blow came when Phoenix police contacted Noel to inform him that Dana had been arrested for attempting to forge real estate documents. Apparently, she'd tried to create fake property deeds that would have given her ownership of several vacant lots in Arizona. The scheme was amateurish and easily detected, but it carried serious felony charges. "She's looking at 5 to 10 years, the detective explained over the phone. Her public defender is pushing for a plea deal, but the prosecutor wants to make an example. We've been tracking a ring of real estate fraudsters, and your ex-wife's case fits the pattern." Noel thanked the detective and hung up, feeling something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine satisfaction. Dana had finally encountered consequences she couldn't manipulate, blame on others, or escape through legal maneuvering. She was going to prison, probably for longer than Colby, and there was nothing she could do about it. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and walked out to his workshop where the modified pump truck sat under a tarp. The equipment had served its purpose, but he kept it as a reminder of what determination and careful planning could accomplish. Rick found him there an hour later, still holding the bourbon and staring at the truck. "Everything okay, boss?" "Everything's perfect," Noel replied. "Dana just got arrested for real estate fraud in Phoenix. She's looking at serious prison time." "Jesus, that woman just can't help herself, can she?" "Some people never learn. They keep making the same mistakes over and over, expecting different results." "What are you going to do with the truck?" Noel considered the question. The pump truck had been instrumental in destroying his enemies, but keeping it felt like holding on to the past. He'd moved beyond revenge and into something better, a life free from people who would betray him for personal gain. "Restore it to standard configuration," he decided. "It's just equipment. The real power was never in the truck. It was in understanding that actions have consequences." Rick nodded and started removing the tarp. As he worked, Noel finished his bourbon and walked back toward the office, where a stack of new contracts waited for his review. Merritt Sanitation had grown by 30% over the past year, thanks partly to his reputation for handling difficult situations with quiet efficiency. He'd built something lasting from the ashes of his marriage, something that belonged entirely to him. And unlike the people who'd tried to destroy him, he'd done it without breaking a single law or violating anyone's trust. In the end, that was the only victory that mattered. 3 years later, Noel married a woman named Sarah Cross, the private investigator who'd helped him document Dana's affair. She understood the value of loyalty and the price of betrayal, having seen countless marriages destroyed by selfishness and deception. Their wedding was small and private, attended only by people who'd proven themselves trustworthy over years of friendship. Dana was still in prison. Colby had been released but was living in a halfway house, working minimum wage jobs and struggling to rebuild his life. Neither of them had any contact with their former lives in Clinton Ridge. Sometimes, late at night, Noel would remember the sound of sewage exploding across the country club patio, or the look on Dana's face when she realized her carefully laid plans had crumbled to dust. But those memories felt distant now, like scenes from someone else's life. He'd moved beyond revenge into something better, a future built on solid ground, surrounded by people who valued honesty above convenience and loyalty above personal gain. The septic business, as it turned out, was an excellent metaphor for life. Everyone produced waste, but only the smart ones made sure it flowed away from their foundation.